Hello, hello. Thank you very much for being here. This is, we do a lot of programming and a lot of different entrepreneurs you get to hear from at the conference. And this is personally one of my favorite sessions because we got enough time to really go in deep on a story that I think is one of the most interesting lean startup stories I've ever seen in my life. I guarantee this is a story you will not hear anywhere else, and not even close to a story you would hear anywhere else. So I am very, very pleased that we get a chance to be here with Cory Nelson from GE. I'll let you give him a sense. I'll let him tell you about his background and how he came to be doing this in a moment. But I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're going to be taking audience questions using our magical high-technology iPad-based system that we tried this morning. So they're going to put the URL up on the screen to submit your questions from your mobile device. They're going to do that, I swear. It's in my monitor. I can see the URL. Oh, there we go. OK. So if you have questions as we go through, put them on there, and we'll try to work them in as we go with the audience. Fair? So, Cory, welcome.
Thanks, Eric.
First, before we get into lean startup, and just give us a sense of your background and kind of what you do at GE and what your career has been like.
OK. So I've been around big equipment really my whole life. I grew up on a wheat farm in North Dakota. I've been around tractors and combines and different kinds of engines. I've worked on things. So it led me to a career to starting out in engineering, but really kind of branched out from there. And I've worked in, started in engineering, went to product management, sales, operations, and then kind of come back to product management sort of in mid-career. So I joined GE about 10 years ago. I went to work in the aeroderivative group where take the main part of the jet engine and do power generation with that. And then in early 2012, I got tapped on the shoulder and they said, hey, we'd really like you to do this new diesel program. This is a chairman's project, so it's coming from Jeff Immelt himself. Jeff has blessed it. You've got funding the first year. Off we go. And what's interesting was if we were on that same plan that we started in those days, there's no way I would be here today. And really, we ended up here because of some of the issues early on in that program.
Mm-hmm. So I know, because now we've had a chance to work together, I know what a diesel program is. Yep. But a lot of our folks, I got a lot of fellow software guys in the audience and have absolutely no idea what you just said and what it means. Okay. So give us a sense for what is it that we're talking about? What are these products?
So these are large diesel engines for power generation.
So not a mobile app?
Not a mobile app. They could have wheels. Sometimes they've got trailers. People tow them around to different places, especially in developing countries. But the MVP that we put forth is a large product. It's about 2.5 megawatts. Uh-huh. That would take care of roughly 3,500 homes in the US, probably 5,000 or 6,000 homes in Africa, something like that. It weighs 30 tons. It's 7.5 meters long, 2.5 meters high, and about 2 meters wide. So it would fill up the better part of this stage.
So big.
Big.
That's my takeaway.
Big and heavy.
Big and heavy, yeah. And the kind of thing that explodes when things go wrong.
Well, we don't like to use those kinds of words.
I see. So hopefully never will happen. Yeah, exactly. That's the software guy in me talking about, wow, that would scare the hell out of me.
But it can power an awful lot of iPhones, charge up iPhones, iPads with 2.5 megawatts, definitely.
That is awesome. So you're saying you got kind of assigned to this project. This is a real entrepreneurial venture within GE. Maybe talk about why is it an unusual project for GE? What was special about it? And kind of how were you feeling when you first got the chance to lead it?
Well, even though I'm more of a seasoned guy, I've been around for 30 years, I certainly didn't anticipate some of the issues that we walked into. I think the whole, it looked really good coming in terms of funding and everything else. And I think back to the definition from your book, right? That a startup is a human enterprise or human institution, right? Yep. And I wouldn't have put those two words in. And then the final couple words are, under extreme uncertainty. And that's certainly what we've experienced really as a team going through this thing. It's the human part of it. It's building a team. It's keeping that team on track and moving it through. But then it's the uncertainty piece, right? And this is a project that even though Jeff blessed it, there's a lot of people between the team and Jeff that weren't necessarily on board with this thing, right? Hey, why do diesel? Why this? Why that? So we spent a lot of time, and finally on the team, we kind of drew a circle. And I call it the if, what, how circle, right? So if we do this, what's it going to look like, and how do we get the stuff done? And unfortunately, we never really went around the circle. We kept going round and round and round the circle the first couple of years, trying to get past if, trying to kind of debating the what. And you know, certainly when you do a clean sheet of paper design like we are, in our business, it takes a long time. I mean, the design part is a big chunk of it, but then in large engines like this, it takes a long time to procure castings and forgings, get those things machined, make sure it all works together. There's always going to be some design errors. So whereas in software you can operate much faster, you can do things 24/7 and so on. A lot of our stuff is really you're at the mercy of your supplier. So these are long-term kinds of development programs.
So give us a sense for a typical program like this, how long between when you decide to do it and when you can ship products? What's kind of a typical cycle time?
When you pull the trigger, it's somewhere between 4 and 5 years.
Yeah. So no, it's not exactly continuous deployment. That's what I'm trying to emphasize.
And as you told me the first time we met, you said, you know, you have companies that are born and die in 6 months. So you're having a hard time getting your head around something that would take this long, and why on earth would it be this long to produce a product?
Well, that was a big part of the education for me, you know, getting to see this project go. And we'll talk about Lean Startup as it applied to it in a moment. For me, really, what was necessary is to really understand, like, what are the drivers of that time? What are the long lead time items that make sense, that need to be there because, you know, physics? And what are the things that, you know, the company's process and kind of our normal product development process kind of impose as overhead on the program? And that was big education for me. So I knew very little about this when we started.
And this being a chairman's program, we were going to try to have the perfect project. So we were going to follow the letter of the product development procedure, and so we wrote a 150-page product requirements document, right? And every segment we were going to pursue, we had a team going off and doing those things, and it was elaborate. It was beautiful by the time it was.
Yeah, it was a gorgeous business plan.
Until we got to Tollgate 2.
Yeah. So I remember like it was yesterday, because it was a big moment in my life when we first met and the context in which we first started talking about Lean Startup. But I'm very curious to hear the story from your point of view. Like, how were you introduced to Lean Startup? What was that like, and what were you thinking at the time?
So it goes back a little bit from that particular meeting, but I recall flying, it was probably to Erie, Pennsylvania, to our transportation group at that time. And Jeff writes a blog, so the blog, he said, here's 3 books that I'm reading. And I think the second book was The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, right? And he said, this is a good book. And it kind of hit me, and I said, hey, really, we're doing a startup internally. This is going to come back around and hit us, right? And so about the time we were going through this Tollgate 2 stuff where
explain what Tollgate 2 is, by the way.
So Tollgate 2 is the product requirements, right? So that's this big document that we created, and basically kind of got it thrown back at us and said, you guys are just taking way too long. I think I heard one of the speakers say this morning that sometimes as a CEO, it just has to be arbitrary.
Yep.
And Jeff had sort of laid down a rule someplace that said no program should go more than 4 years. Well, we were tracking 5 or 5.5 years. So we automatically kind of got put into the penalty box, and that's when we met you. So we got sent for remedial training. How can we get this thing going faster?
So this was the very early days of Lean Startup at GE, and the way I remember it was, I had given a bunch of speeches and talks inside the GE, and they were, I think auditioning me a little bit to see, like, how does this make sense? And they wanted me to come and address Jeff and his officers and have kind of a moment for them to consider this idea. And Jeff had said, well, it's great for software, but I don't want to waste time with this unless we can prove it. So I think he pretty much chose a project that he thought it was very unlikely to work, something really hard and difficult and problematic, and it has everything going against it, because it's not like, well, if it worked for that. And then I met Cory, because so I can't only imagine how what that was like for you to kind of be summoned to do this remedial training. I don't know if that was like such a great day in your life when you got the news.
Well, I guess I take those things with a grain of salt, and I thought, if nothing else, we'll learn a couple things, right? But the meeting that we had certainly wasn't conducive to a learning environment. We had about 14 officers, and they were peppering us with questions, and I got about 2 slides into my deck, and it kind of everything, all pandemonium broke loose. And at the end, I remember shaking your hand and saying, Eric, really all I'd want to do is if you could spend a half a day with our team at some point, just you. We don't need 14 officers chiming in and adding value, supposedly. This would be much better if we could just do this with you. And ultimately, we got there. When we started the Lean Startup training, which became the FastWorks training, we got our time with you, and I think that was valuable.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, this was, I want to kind of really set the scene for folks. This team gets summoned up to headquarters, and there's all these luminaries and senior executives in the back of the room just to observe. And they're really like this the whole time. And what I remember from that meeting especially was the first order of business I felt was for Cory to present to the whole group, here is the approved business case for this program. Here's what our current plan is, and here's how it works. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what that was like to kind of walk through what the real uncertainties were in the program kind of for the first time with that audience.
Yeah, we didn't get very far. No, I mean, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty, and I think GE is it's a large public company, and certainly we've got quarterly commitments to make, so it's harder to plan for the long term. And so I think there was a real concerted effort initially to try to kind of shield the team from that. But it was sort of after the first year, you really need to go back into the business and improve your worth. This program's got to stack up against other programs, and decide which wings we're going to fund. And even though Jeff kicked this thing off initially, that doesn't give you a pass for life.
Right.
And so you need to come back with something that's going to work. And I think the MVP sort of became something that it was sort of the necessity was the motherhood of invention, right? MVP was something we needed at that time. Mm-hmm. We needed to do something faster. We needed to do something, and I think we kind of got it conceptually around, hey, we can go learn some things with the MVP. There's some things that we want to test, but I don't think, at least I didn't, and I think most of the team didn't think about that. We're going to learn as much as we have, right, to begin, and how important that is, not just from the learning side, but also it gave us something to talk about with the senior leadership. I think when you talk about a program that's out there this many years and they're worried about, hey, am I going to make it this quarter or next quarter, or how's the year look, or all those things, we were so far from what they would typically think about or do, where now the MVP brought this thing inside the window of what they cared about. Mm-hmm. And so it really gave us something tangible to talk about. And we were able to do it sort of carving a piece out of the main program, which is still a program that's in place. So we didn't have to go ask for extra funding. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of creative freedom within that to go ahead and do that MVP. But I think that was really the turning point coming out of that, like I say, kind of the product review or product requirements review Tollgate 2 debacle. Yeah. It forced us into, hey, we've got to do something faster. And we came up, I think, half a dozen different MVPs that we were contemplating at that time, and kind of culminated in the big one I talked about a minute ago. Yeah,
so one of the funny things about this project is when I'm talking to software people about the need to do an MVP, people who are having who are uncomfortable with lean startup, they're like, well, MVP can't be the right way because you can't make a minimum viable engine. Now, most people wouldn't know an engine if it hit them in the face. They're just trying to pick an example of something that they think is too difficult to do an MVP for, and it's been really, by the way, very handy for me to be like, well, actually, I know actually that you don't know what you're talking about because I was there, I saw it happen. But for the audience who I'm sure is having this exact thought, like, I don't want to ride in a car with a minimum viable engine, I don't want to fly in a plane with a minimum, like, what does MVP mean in the context of this program, and kind of what are some of the things that you learned from that?
Yeah. So in our case, it was taking an existing product that already had some time on it. It had been proven both in the lab at the factory as well as out in the field. I think the high time engine was around 10,000 hours. So we knew that this product worked well. It was based on one of our gas engines that had millions of hours of operation. So technically, we weren't taking a big risk. And certainly from a customer perspective, I've got a lot of empathy for customers. I grew up on a farm. As a kid, I had to run to town for parts and work on things and get all greasy and stuff. So I have a big empathy for customers, and I didn't want to create any orphans, right? What I didn't want to do is, okay, let's go sell a few of these someplace in the world and then forget about it if somebody turns tail on this program. We need to be out there to support these things. So often these products will run for 10, 15, 20 years, especially in more of a standby application. So we didn't want to leave any orphans. So that was one of our things as we went through this program was, it's minimum in terms of what we've done to optimize the product, but it's a very good product by itself. Yeah. It had great fuel efficiency. It was very competitive, coming out of the gates. But not to say that our engineers weren't a little embarrassed about it, right? That they really would have liked to kind of the hot rod types, hey, we can really get this thing cranking if you give me a little bit more money, Cory, right? But you had to say, that's for version 2, or maybe it's version 1.1. And it's something we haven't quite figured out yet as to what will our next step be. How do we get the M out of MVP? That's right. In this case. But we certainly want to put something out that we could stand behind, feel good about it. I think that's what we have so far. But in terms of testing things, to me, the MVP is really more back to testing. And testing can be and you and I talked about the brochure test. Just mock up a brochure, take it to a customer and say, would you buy it? Yep. Right. We talked to those customers early on in this program, but not asking the question, would you buy it? We asked the question, what do you think of this particular specification? And again, like some of the other speakers would say, right, yeah, it's nice, it's good.
Yeah, I'll take a free pony, no problem.
Yeah, that'll be good. But we didn't ask that key question. You know, if we produce something of this spec, would you actually buy it? So as we went through our MVP candidates, we did some of that paper stuff first. And like I say, we kind of honed in on this one product that said, hey, you know, we've got something over here in the transportation business that looks pretty darn good the way it is. We have a couple little product tweaks to it. We didn't really optimize it from a power output. We've got a lot more room to grow from a power output standpoint. But again, it's going to be, I think, a good product for these first customers that'll go out and buy it. And I think you want to give those first customers also a break that as we come out with the new features, you know, whether it's a controls upgrade or some other things, you know, certainly give them the opportunity to get in first and maybe test some more things with us. And
sure, and be a reward for being an early adopter.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the concerns people have often is as soon as we start to do the de-scoping exercise of MVP, that's going to mean compromises in terms of safety, quality, performance, you know, the things that really are non-negotiables for customers.
Right.
You know, I appreciate you saying that was something you felt it was important, that's something you felt you could really stand behind for customers. Can you talk a little bit about how did you figure out what are the areas where we can do less and be a little bit of embarrassed and it's okay, and what are the areas where no, we have to stick to our traditional rigor and a compromise is not acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I think in being around GE for 10 years and recalling, I guess, kind of how the product requirement or product development process has changed, it's only grown in the last 10 years, right? You keep adding process, and every time a product goes out in the field and doesn't do what it's supposed to do or has some early failures or something else, we add more paragraphs to the process, right? So it was kind of time to take a look at that and say, were a lot of these just one-offs? Or are these really something that we should be doing all the time and just didn't think of it before? So we've taken that as sort of our framework to work within, but at each step of the way, we're making the judgment call, is this something that we really need to do? Or do we have validation, in this case, from our transportation group, that we don't have to redo that same stuff over on our side of the business?
Right.
So we've come back and challenged a lot of those processes and to get things through. I would say performance is one area where we've definitely said, you know, this is not going to be as much performance as we could have. So if we did more tweaking, we could get this thing to work better. But beyond that, I mean, I think, you know, we have to certify it. It has to meet CE standards in Europe to leave our European facility. So, you know, it's certainly something that, you know, it's definitely a viable product.
Yeah, I mean, and people sometimes forget the V.
Right.
Yeah, and that's pretty important. So I want to go back to that meeting with all these officers, and maybe I'll say something that maybe you don't have to say. I'll say it. My recollection is we had this, in the meeting, we talked about the future projections for this program. Now, to get the program funded at the level that is going to be, these are not inexpensive, this is not an inexpensive product development effort. This is a lot of money to produce this thing. And so we talked about, you had these forecasts in there, and I remember, you know, the officers were all kind of cranky about it, and you're talking about how much money we're going to make in the year 2025 or something like that. It was numbers so big that I couldn't even fathom, because you got to justify the ROI on this very expensive program. And I remember asking the officers, okay, everyone in this room, raise your hand if you believe in this forecast. And I kid you not, every person in the room is like, what kind of a dumb question is that, kid? This is the approved official GE forecast. Our finance people have signed off. A lot of people have signed off. We wrote a huge check on the basis of this forecast. And I said, okay, thank you very much, that's great. But seriously, raise your hand if you believe that in the year 2025, we're going to make exactly, and I read out the number that was on the chart, you know, some big bar chart. And of course, at that point, everyone's hand went down. I was like, well, we don't know exactly, of course. You know, it's just a guess. We don't know for sure. It was an entry point into talking about, okay, what are the uncertainties with this program? The way I remember it is the plan that the officers were excited to talk about was all about the technical aspects. GE is an engineering company at the end of the day. We talked a lot about fuel efficiency and performance and power, weight, you know, all the different use cases it was going to be used at. I always remember it as like on land, on sea, by plane, by boat, on a train. You know, if you need an engine, this program is there for you.
That's right.
And so when we started talking about the MVP, we said, well, if you had to get a product out, you know, in less than 5 years, what would it look like? And you guys had some really creative ideas, including the one that ultimately you wound up doing, which is taking an existing engine and modifying it. And then I remember asking, okay, does anyone in the room have a customer who might want to buy this? And one of the sales officers was like, oh, I know a guy. And we were like ready to broker a deal. And I was getting pretty excited. And one of the officers, who of course will remain nameless for this exercise, was really not having a good time. And he said that it stuck with me. It stuck with me every day since then. He said, I'm sorry. What is the point of selling one engine to one customer? A second ago, we were talking about billions and billions of dollars we're going to make, and now we're talking about making, like, from his point of view, 25 cents. And it's like I had said, hey, if you found a quarter on the street, picked it up and put it in your pocket, you just improved the GE balance sheet. Congratulations. It's like, it's preposterous. And we had this conversation right there in the room. It was like, look, if you believe the forecast and there's nothing to be learned, you're right. this exercise is pointless. And he was like, okay, great, problem solved. And it was luckily some of his peers said, hold on. But we said before, there's all this uncertainty about the future. So I want to kind of get a sense of, okay, as you guys decided to do this, this MVP, and as you decided to take a risk and do something different than the normal way, like you must have encountered that question 100 times, kind of, well, what is the point of doing something small? I thought this was going to be a big program. Like, how have you handled that question, as you've gotten it over and over again from the audience, I'm looking at questions from the audience, from the officers and other leaders in the company? Yeah,
I think, fastworks has allowed us to take a smaller step. And I think when the program was started, even before I got onto the program, so there was a study team that worked for probably 6 months before I joined the team. Everything was about taking a big swing. Don't go to Jeff with something that's small. You're going to waste his time unless it's, if you can't get to a scale of at least $1 billion kind of a product line at some point in time, whatever it is out in your business case, don't waste your time. And of course, to go from 0 to $1 billion, whether it's software or whether it's diesel generator sets, right? That's a lot of units and a lot that goes on between being here and there. And I think the MVPs really help us in those smaller steps. And like I say, it made it okay to take a smaller step and do that. Mm-hmm. And I think it also got people to take a step back and say, okay, some of these programs, we got all done with them and they didn't sell.
Right.
Why didn't they sell? And so in this case, we're going to be going through the same channels that we plan to sell the ultimate product to. So we're getting the skids greased for a lot of those things as we go along here. And I think that becoming a little bit more of a learning organization versus just calling your shot and then hitting that shot, mm-hmm. That I think is what's been different at GE. And I think the language has changed over the last couple of years to allow us to do that. And we've probably been at the forefront of some of that. We've taken some of the hits along the way, but I think it's been good overall.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if we mentioned before, FastWorks is the GE Lean Startup corporate-wide transformation program that has been really successful at incorporating these ideas across the company. This was one of the very first projects that went through that training. So Cory was really our guinea pig, and he did take the shots. I was there. I saw it. So switching kind of from an internal perspective to an external perspective, I know you had really valuable discussions with distributors and with potential customers that help you validate some early hypotheses. Like, can you talk a little bit about how that was a different process than you might have approached those distributors or customers kind of in the more traditional way of building a product like this?
Well, in this sort of a product, services is critical to the end customer to have parts. We like to talk about being local, available, and competent, right? Mm-hmm. You need to do those three things. And these are fairly high-tech machines. You wouldn't take your nice German or Japanese luxury car and then take it to the little guy over on the corner to work on these things, right? So we need to have the support in place, not only almost primarily on the service side to begin with. No customer will buy this unless they've got a way to get this thing serviced and taken care of. So we needed to work with our channels. Most of our channels did not have diesel, or if they did have diesels, it was somebody else's diesel. So it was part of our test in the MVP is, okay, so if we're going to sell a few of these things, where can we sell them? What channels will accept it? These are independent businessmen. Yes, we've got some leverage on them, but at the end of the day, they make the call whether they add to this product to what they're representing or not. So there was a lot involved with that piece. And I think to me, one of the big learnings, and again, it should have been a fairly obvious thing, but came back as we began actually starting to sell, was we're not going to sell a new product until we find somebody that we already have a relationship with. Mm-hmm. And we were on a junket someplace, and we were trying to see this one.
Give people a sense of like where these distributors are in the world. I remember you guys took some quite long trips to do this.
Yeah, I mean, the target for this is places where the power grid is weak, right? So places like sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of India, Indonesia being an island or series of island nation, but it's those kinds of places where the power grid is weak, and they may have gas or may have gas coming to a certain point, so they don't go with a natural gas engine or a gas turbine, but they can truck in diesel, even though it's expensive, and they can get lights for a few hours per day, and like I say, charge up their cell phones or whatever it is they're trying to do, have a little bit of lights at night. So it's certainly helping people, but oftentimes some very tough areas, and to find somebody that's already situated there, has the technical expertise to work on a high-tech engine, that's a challenge as well.
Mm-hmm. And now that you've been through that MVP sales process. Talk about how your understanding of who the customer is and what they need is different than it was when you started this.
I think the customer part we probably knew. It was more of how do we get it to the customer through our process, and a lot of internal stuff to be able to enable us to do external things, and getting all the there's a group that is in charge of the channels, there's a group that's in charge of sales, there's a group that's in charge of service, and it's making sure all those groups talk with each other, and we've had to set up some internal rhythms to be sure that that stuff happens, because if we're not there to make sure it happens, it just doesn't get done on its own.
Sure. People are used to working in silos too.
Right. And to take on a new product, again, extensions of existing products, pretty easy, because something's already there, we just kind of copy the template. But something in a new space is more challenging. So we've had to focus and put a lot of time in on that as well.
So we're starting to get questions in from the audience, so thank you. Please keep the questions coming. The URL, I hope, is still on the screen. Oh, they're going to bring it back. Okay. So please bring them in. So one question we got from the audience is, because you're selling a smaller number of units rather than the millions of, well, the person wrote millions of hits you can get on a website. I thought you should say millions of units and millions of dollars.
That'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're selling a small number of units, how do you navigate through the muddle of low numbers and even single digits? Like, I think maybe like, how do you handle the fact that your early initial results, you see them as promising because you have a huge learning. Yeah. In the context of a multi-billion-dollar company, maybe they seem a little small.
I think, and I would answer this by my prior role was in larger products in the gas turbine side, and we used to sell about 40 or 50 a year, right? Yeah. So we didn't have to have numbers, we knew them by name. But to get those 40 or 50, we had to chase 100 or 150, right? So it's not big numbers from a sample size. It certainly couldn't do a lot of A/B comparisons, right, or trials like we've heard about from the stage here. But it's dealing with those initial customers. There's always a stream of these things coming through. It can be kind of sporadic, but at any point in time, I think right now we're tracking probably 20 to 30 opportunities worldwide, kind of in this product space that might be a couple hundred units. So that's the kind of size that we're dealing with. So yeah, 3 or 5 or 10, that's a significant number to us.
Yeah. You had a great image. I don't know when we had this conversation, sometime in the past. We had a conversation we were talking about as an image of the kind of complexity that can attach itself to products during the development stage as barnacles on a ship. And so I'm curious, like, I think so many people in the audience relate to this, that as more and more leaders pay attention and just requirements get added on, and just scope creep is the ultimate killer of projects. So kind of what's your view on how this kind of MVP approach, fastworks approach, kind of helps you cut down with that complexity, get simpler and faster, and kind of remove requirements that they're not really required, they're more like nice to have suggestions, might be a good idea kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this was going to be sort of a cool corporate project, and that it was going to be across businesses, right, which automatically adds to complexity.
Yep.
It was going to, rely on global teams. We weren't going to relocate people, but we're going to leave people where they were and try to work virtually, which again adds to complexity. Mm-hmm. They wanted to bring in some new technologies into GE to enable us to do more engine development down the road. Again, you guys are going to break the ice on that one. We had a new CAD system that we wanted to use, right, a PLM. So we took on those new things initially because, again, we were kind of getting the corporate funding. We were feeling it. We had a little bit of swagger. And we got about, almost to the end of that first year, and it's like, we got to stop doing these extra things, right? We need to stay focused on the goal. And so we started calling them barnacles on the ship, right? So when the next barnacle comes to want to attach itself, we need to knock that thing off so we can keep the ship running a little bit faster. I probably spent a lot of my time, and again, picking up some of the language from yesterday, a lot of my time is kind of as the champion in the executive suite, but also, I like to be the founder, the product manager, having my hands on the product and having input to the design and all that stuff. But I probably spent over half of my time in that first year just trying to stiff arm folks and keep the team moving over here, and we can be on stage spinning the plates, but behind the curtain, the team needed to be making that engine.
Well, questions are really pouring in now, so keep them coming. This is great. Okay, a lot of questions in here about what does this look like enterprise-wide. People want to know what it's like at GE in general. Now, I'm not going to ask you to speak on behalf of the entire GE enterprise because it's I don't know if you guys know, it's kind of large, has diverse viewpoints, and that's not Cory's role. But I'll try a couple of these questions on you,
Sure.
and what I'm really curious about is not, you don't have to speak on behalf of the company, but just what's your experience been seeing fastworks roll out, seeing people embrace it? What do you see? So here, first question was, all right, what about GE, the larger company? Can you share a little bit about how GE made Lean Startup part of the culture and DNA of the company, or even how much does a larger company even support these methods?
So from where I sit, again, so this is Cory, Cory talking, not necessarily GE talking. But
everyone got that?
Yeah,
okay.
From what I see, I guess, and what I've observed, I think we're still in the early stages.
Totally.
I think certainly at the senior leadership level, there's 15, 20% that sort of get it and really could do these things, and there's still a lot of folks that are either somewhat skeptical or they're just very good operations folks that this is not their DNA, to be experimental and to be creative and to be innovative, right? It's more, hey, here's the number, I've got to beat this number, and don't bother me with how you get there, just go figure it out and do it by yourself. So I think we've got still a ways to go. I mean, Jeff has been very clear about the fact that he wants a simpler, faster organization.
Totally.
And so this is part of that path to get there, but I still think we've got a long ways to go.
And there's been a few, like there was a recent Business Week article about fastworks, and there's a little bit of information out there. I would say, as just the outside person looking in, I think most people do not have any appreciation for the scale at which GE has attempted to do this. I mean, the total number of people who have been trained, the number of projects, the number of coaches, it's kind of staggering, and I'll let them say what they want to say about it, but just to say that this is not one project that we happen to meet each other, at a workshop and said, hey, let's try it. This is something that's come directly from the top of the company and has been implemented really across the board. I like this one. So you've kind of become, in some ways, the poster child for this initiative.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse, I know. And probably you would prefer maybe have a little bit lower profile within the company. So the question is, what's your experience been sharing your story within the larger, diverse organization of GE so that other people can benefit from your experience?
So I spent a fair amount of time in 2013. In fact, I ran into you a few times and some of the training, and I would come to an event, something like this, and be one of a panel members or talking about it. It's been fun. I mean, I've always enjoyed change kinds of things, especially when I believe in the mission as to where it's going. So I think that's been good. Hopefully, I've been able to convince a few folks to at least give it a try, right?
Yep.
If nothing else, try it out on a project that you don't think is going to go anyway. So, if they
you didn't lose anything. Yeah.
Right, but
it's the green eggs and ham strategy. It's like, just try it, you might like it.
But we've kind of done a top-down, and now it's time to empower more of the teams. And I think that's where the coaches come in to really help the teams day to day execute better. There's growth boards set up in many businesses now, which I think are a good first step to get some of those ideas.
Explain what a growth board is.
So a growth board is an employee, I guess I'll use like the oil and gas or the transportation examples where they've got a growth board set up of some or all of the key executives. There's a pot of money that's set aside that is not taken from if they're having a bad quarter, right? So they leave the people alone, so they've got secure funding when it comes to that. And they can bring ideas in any time of the year. And we used to have a session we called Growth Playbook, which has only happened in the spring. So you could only have good ideas kind of in January, February, March, right? And had to get into Growth Playbook, get funded, and move along. Now people in those organizations can bring ideas in any time of the year. If they have merit, they get a little bit of funding, take it a little bit further, do an MVP, do some leap of faith assumptions. And so I think that's going to start to generate some great ideas.
Yeah. For using this kind of VC style of investment with metered funding, as an antidote to the typical corporate culture of entitlement funding, where kind of once you start funding something, the expectation is you kind of keep funding it year in, year out, no matter what, as long as politically speaking, you're doing fine. What I've seen is that it creates a culture of accountability where the teams that understand that they need to achieve that next milestone and learn from customers, and they're not going to get more funding. It clarifies the mind in a way that the traditional budgeting process doesn't. Okay, now the MVP questions are coming in. I knew they were going to come. Okay, so. I'll just ask you a couple of these kind of quick fire. First was just how much did the engine specs change during your paper discussions with customers or with distributors? Or can you even remember?
No, I'm just trying to think of the deals that we were close to. We offered a pretty vanilla spec. And so there really weren't many options. I mean, there was like a generator option, medium voltage, or high voltage, right? There wasn't a whole lot they could pick from. So it was more, I think, around how are you going to support me and the services side than it was product options. And we had enough basic product options to certainly make, again, a viable power plant,
Yep.
but not a lot of bells and whistles.
Maybe you talk about how your plan for the ultimate engine, that you're still, kind of that larger vision that you have, how was that influenced by the things that you've learned in those customer conversations? Is it pretty much the same, or have some of those details changed?
In the power generation segment, I think we, again, had much better understanding as to how we would sell and support. From the product spec side, I think we're learning some things now just in terms of going through a few sales processes that we would do some tweaks on the product to make us a little more competitive in how we rate it, how we present it out to customers.
Got it. Folks want to hear more about these tests that you did with potential customers. So you mentioned the brochure test. Maybe not everybody knows kind of how that would look. Remember, people coming from a very different world than you live in every day. Maybe just walk through mechanically. How did you kind of design those experiments? What did the customer conversations look like? What collateral did you show them? Give us some flavor for what that looked like.
Yeah, we put together basically a 4-page brochure in a PDF. It was ugly, the first one. It was black in the background. It looked like we were going to have a funeral instead of something joyous. But
engineers made the brochure.
We fortunately hired a sales guy relatively, probably earlier than we should have. In terms of what I mean, people would have said, don't hire this person yet. But fortunately, we got John, and John's been great. So John, ex-military guy, you'd say, John, here's the mission, go get him. And he went out and started traveling the world. I mean, I think he's probably up there and across our entire business unit, he's got probably the second or third most miles of anybody this year trying to go to, again, where a lot of the places where diesel is. But he just started selling that initial brochure. So I would say define it well enough to do at least a simple spec sheet, right? Dimensions, weight, performance, some artist rendering or CAD drawings or whatever you can put together, and go find somebody with a relationship that you can trust and get some feedback from, and start right away.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got a very specific question for someone who clearly knows something about this.
Okay.
And that is, how did you manage the software and sensor development in parallel with the hardware MVP for the engine? When did they align, and was that kind of part of the first product, second product? How did you think about that?
They had to align on the first product. And it was taking the transportation engine and controls and meshing them with the genset or generator package controls and coming up with a working system. So we had to get that done in the first one. So we put an engine in the test cell back in May, had first fire, and throughout the summer it was getting through the controls development work to the point where we can hand this off to a customer and they can produce power.
Does that mean, it's probably pretty obvious to you, but did you have to have hardware and software people working on,
yes,
on your team in a cross-functional way? Because I know that's sometimes a challenge to do that.
Yeah, I mean, in an organization like ours, software people are a relatively rare commodity. Oftentimes we'll go on the outside and delegate a specific task. So it was getting the right people, either internally or externally, to be on this project at this point in time, for the 3 months that we needed to get that development work done.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I know entrepreneurs struggle with a lot with this process is, how do you, on the one hand, have the big vision in mind, the multi-year, maybe even multi-decade project you want to be doing, and be acting quickly in the short term to do the MVPs and not get pulled too far in one direction or the other? What was that experience like for you?
Well, we've had, I think, a long tradition of what we call multi-generation product plans, MGPPs, everything in GE is an acronym, right?
Yeah.
So we've had those. But I think, again, back to the risk thing, outside or out of 18 or 24 months, a lot of that stuff really never comes true, or it's more aspirational than anything, or directional. So we've maintained those thoughts so that we do get asked the question from time to time. We can pull that chart out of the deck and say, here's what our thinking is, here's where we want to go. Assuming we get this kind of funding and we get these things to work, here's kind of the path that we're going to take. So we do have that. But I would say the fastworks has got us much more focused on the here and now, kind of inside of 12 months or maybe inside of 18 months, and trying to keep the team more focused there as well and not worry so much about the future. The future will happen when it happens.
It'll sort itself out.
Yeah.
All right, we got time for one last question,
Okay.
and it is, what was the biggest surprise learning you had in this process? What surprised you the most?
I think the biggest surprise was, and it's probably a category of these things, and kind of back to the Rumsfeld, there's the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. And it was the number of unknown unknowns, and especially on the internal side, trying to work across the businesses, people with different systems, different approaches, different toll gate processes, wouldn't have expected that much variance across the organization and all the time it took us to get that stuff worked out.
Yeah. Did this live up to my promise? Yeah, I thought so. So just join me in giving a huge round of applause. Huge thank you, Cory, for doing this. I'm very grateful. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.